You have to look at the camera. So I'm going to do the clap, okay?
Hi everyone. Let's listen to my mom.
Gabe asked if he could do an intro for me. So he's going to make a noise as he exits, and then he's going to go and play computer games in his room. Thanks, love. Okay, so this is take number 2. After take number 1, I managed to turn my audio off, which is a real pain in the ass because it was a really good take. This video is a very brief summary of the author's note of Life of Pi. At a later stage, I'm going to do an analysis of that author's note, and I will do summaries for all the chapters, but only analyses of some of the chapters because I don't think all of them need to be summarized. So the first thing we need to be asking is, what is an author's note? What is it for? An author's note is a space where the author connects with the reader in their own voice. That might sound a little weird, like why in their own voice? Isn't the whole book in their voice? And we just need to remember that there is a distinction between the voice of the narrator and the author. The narrator, or the voice that we hear in the book, is not necessarily the author. There can, and very often is, a distinction between those two entities. So the author's note typically appears after the novel, and it's a space where the author connects with the audience in his or her own voice and does things like maybe explains their inspiration for writing, or looks at if they took some liberties with history. They might say, you know, I've written this novel just so that you're aware, I know that I changed history and I did it because it works with the story. They might also explain some of their interests in certain topics, or what their message was that they were hoping to get across in the novel. And they can also include in the author's note their acknowledgements, their thanks to publishers or editors or long-suffering spouses or people who gave them grant money in order to write the book. The author's note typically appears at the end of the story, and it is non-fiction. It's just a moment of reality, of connecting with the audience. So what does Yann Martel do with the author's note? He puts the author's note at the beginning of the book. And in the author's note, he really skillfully blends fiction and reality, non-fiction and fiction, reality and fantasy. He introduces in his book characters that are in the novel. And so what this does is it makes us wonder, or it makes us sort of start to believe that the story of Life of Pi might be true. And when we get to the end of the novel and we discover that the story of Life of Pi, the fantasy that he created with Richard Parker and spending all of this time on the boat, is in fact not true, the author's note stands as a reminder of the power of fantasy, the power of creation, in order to cope with those really difficult periods of life, those really tumultuous times. And for me, that's why this book is so beautiful, because of the really skillful way in which Martel plays with this idea of fantasy and reality, and the power of fantasy to overcome tragedy within life. So there's a little bit of analysis thrown in there. It's not a lot. And before I go off on a tangent, which I want to do, I'm going to rein that in and just very briefly summarize what it is that you're going to find in that author's note. At the beginning of the author's note, Yann Martel explains that he had recently published a novel and that it wasn't very successful. And so he thought that a bit of time in India to write a new novel would be really good for him. He goes to India and he plans on writing a novel that's set in Portugal. And with that, he realizes in the writing of the second novel that this novel doesn't actually have any spark. It doesn't have any life. And so he makes the decision to abandon that novel. He doesn't just abandon it though. What he tells us is that he has posted it to a fictitious address with a fictitious return address. So immediately we are seeing that playfulness, the playing with fiction and non-fiction. He then goes on to say how he ends up in Pondicherry in India, and he is sitting in a cafe having coffee, and he's approached by this elderly, dignified man who turns out to be Francis Adarabusami, Mamaji, later in the novel. Francis Adarabusami says to him, "I have a story that will make you believe in God." And that's quite a claim to make. And so the power of that statement, "I have a story that will make you believe in God," the power of that statement sort of frames the rest of the novel. Yann Martel, the character of Yann Martel, is initially skeptical. He's sort of thinking, is this guy trying to, preach to me? Is he trying to win me over to religion? And so it's like, yeah, okay, sort of listening, but the implication is he's trying to get away. But as they talk, so he gets out his pen and he starts writing down what it is that Francis Adarabusami tells him. In the author's note, Yann Martel doesn't tell us anything about Pi's story. What he does do is say that he goes back to Canada and he looks Pi up in the phone book, and he eventually finds him, and he meets with him many times and records his story and asks him questions. And he then says that he chose to present the story of Pi Patel in Pi Patel's own words. So where the author's note appears to come from Yann Martel as a first-person author, the story of Pi Patel comes to us in the first person as if it's from Pi. And again, that works with that sort of playfulness around what is real and what is not real, and what do we believe and what do we not believe. So for next time, we'll be looking at some analyses and some future summaries, and I'm looking forward to doing some more videos. Take care.